You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another movie review. And today we're reviewing another live-action anime/manga movie, and that being the Initial D 2005 live-action movie. Now, unlike a lot of live-action anime movies, this was not made in Japan. This actually was made in Hong Kong, so the movie itself is entirely in Chinese rather than Japanese. However, it still takes place in Japan, and still takes place at the fictional Mount Akina, which is based on the actual Mount Haruno. And hopefully I got all those names right. Now, this movie adapts the first three stages of Initial D, but it does take a lot of liberties and cuts a lot of corners, as you'd imagine, combining, the first three stages of Initial D into one singular movie. This movie itself actually isn't very highly regarded, as is typically the case with anime/manga adaptations into live action. However, I think that this was actually a really great movie. I had a great time watching it. There was a lot of big differences. As I said, it does do the first three stages of Initial D, but they do remove entire characters from the equation. For instance, in this movie, Keisuke doesn't exist. There's only one Takahashi, that being Ryosuke, and a lot of Keisuke's role is played by Nakazato, the leader of the Night Kids, the Grim Reaper guy. So they sort of combine the two of them there. But also Iketani doesn't exist, and they gave a lot of his roles to Itsuki. And then they had Itsuki also be the son of their gas station boss, so that was a really weird choice. But the only choice that really pissed me off was they turned Bunta into an abusive drunk, who's just constantly drinking, passing out, and is an abusive father. And they sort of removed a lot of the suave and cool elements of Bunta's personality from the series. This movie did the Mogi prostitution plotline pretty well as well, I think. The movie, of course, ends right before the creation of Project D, as Takumi agrees to join it, as is typical for the end of Stage 3. But, many of the races that were in the actual anime series do not take place in this movie, such as Shinji, with the gum tape deathmatch, and Impact Blue. None of that happens. But because of how short the movie is, it's like an hour and 45 minutes, give or take, I think that they actually did a really good job at knowing what to cut out and what to combine to actually make it flow really smoothly. Were I not familiar with Initial D already because of the anime, I wouldn't have known that all this stuff was missing. So I think they do a really good job, despite what they removed, keeping it fairly consistent and an actually pretty good adaptation. The soundtrack was a bit weird. It had like this Chinese hip-hop sort of thing going for it. During the actual races, it was more fitting than it was when they were just driving around or having normal stuff going on. It wasn't the worst soundtrack in the world, but obviously without the Euro beats, it's not quite the same. In addition to Itsuki getting a lot of Iketani's roles and also being the son of their gas station boss, they also made him a lot more obnoxious and kind of turned him into sort of a spoiled brat. But it still feels like Itsuki. It just feels like they dialed up the more obnoxious parts of his personality to 11. Interestingly, when I watched this movie, the subtitles had all the names correct as their Japanese names, but the actual audio in the Chinese, it sounds like they made Chinese versions of the characters' names. So, for instance, Takumi, they're constantly calling him Tahai when you're actually listening, but it says Takumi in the subtitles, obviously. Also, a really strange choice. A lot of the times the license plates were blurred out, so that almost makes me wonder if they just didn't bother making, fake license plates for the movie itself. But then there were other times where they were just completely in full view unblurred, so I'm a little confused on that, in all honesty. But yeah, as far as live-action anime movies go, this is actually one of my favorites. I still don't think it's as good as the Japanese Death Note movies, but I do think it is probably a close second after those as far as anime live-action adaptations go for me. Interesting thing with the movie, too, is you feel like as the movie goes on, the budget got better because the races get better and better with their production quality as the film progresses. And maybe they just kind of save the best for last, but I definitely think that it does kind of improve as it goes on. But yeah, for a Hong Kong adaptation of an anime and manga series, I think this is actually a really great movie. If you want to watch it yourself, it's currently available on the US version of Netflix at the time of this recording. I liked it so much after watching it, I actually had to buy it, so I went and ordered the DVD online after watching it on Netflix. So I highly recommend watching it if you're a fan of Initial D. Like I said, there are going to be some changes, but if you can overlook those, it's actually a fairly faithful adaptation and actually does a really good job at merging the first three stages of Initial D into a pretty cohesive and enjoyable movie. But anyway, that's all I really have to say about the Initial D live-action movie. This has been Fugitive Red Eye. Have a good one.